Well, all my liberal lefty friends, when I talk to them and they talk about which commentator on television and analysts do they have the highest regard for, Somadoda Fikeni gets a big nod of approval. And I'm just boasting a little bit because he happens to be one of my mentors and friends, and I'm in his office and I just got a few questions I want to ask him. Okay, Dr. Fikeni, by what authority do you speak these incredible words of wisdom in the very kind of tumultuous political ferment of our last year or so? What gives you your sort of wisdom?
Well, I was born in a village near the small town of Mount Aleph at Maklesibeni in the Eastern Cape, towards the border with KwaZulu-Natal. And I grew up in the rural areas in a traditional life, and I went to high schools not far away from that village. Only when I went to the university, I went to Mthatha, and I then had this opportunity of going to Canada where I did my master's, and to the US where I did my PhD. So anything I say is a combination of a number of things. I grew up in a family of traditional leaders and priests, and I observed them from childhood, seeing how they operated with interactions with the people and so on, and also the traditional people in the village, their wisdom. So I do think that what makes me today, it's a combination of the native wisdom of villagers who imparted this to me, and the value systems, especially putting into the center the sense of integrity, honesty in anything you do or say. And it was then refined by my political activism from high school years to university years. I was in and out of prison, fighting against apartheid, mobilizing at a very young, tender age. And it also gave me a sense of appreciating justice and the struggle that goes to that. Then education gave me some perspectives, some global view, and you combine all those things, and the fact that I'm still very much involved in community development work in my villages, and therefore by extension I'm still very much in touch with the people I grew up within. All those things do give me a sense of appreciating political developments, heritage, history, and the economic issues, and that's what gives me a sense of my political analysis, my social commentary on political issues, on policy issues, on political economy issues, as well as heritage.
Now, my other great mentor is this Chilean development economist, Manfred Max Neef, and he talks about resources in two ways. He says there are conventional resources and non-conventional resources. And the conventional resources are basically money and power. They are depleted by usage. A vote for one party means you can't vote for another one. And then he says for effective development to happen, there needs to be this whole appreciation of the non-conventional, intangible resources, which are depleted by non-usage. If we don't use them, we lose them. And it seems to me that what you bring to is very much that consciousness of your deeper traditions, your culture, your customs, your sense of identity with your land and your people, but yet able to play in a global village and speaks wisdom to it, because many westernized societies, which is all about money and power, it's almost like lost in essence.
To me, I do think that what we call social capital is the most important resource that people should have. That social capital is those resources you get from interacting with people, it could be Ubuntu, it could be all these other things, plus the networks you get along the way, instead of the tangible things. Indeed, it is very important, as Martin Luther King Jr. says, if you have not found something for which you prepare to die, you are not fit to live. As Steve Biko says, it's better to die for an idea that shall live rather than live for an idea that shall die.
Sure.
All those things do tell something that when you try to assist the society to understand things, if you are driven by honesty, by humanity, you speak for that other person who doesn't have an opportunity to access the media, to access the world, and so forth. But at the same time, you try to simplify very complex issues in a manner that they see themselves and say, this is what I was thinking about. I should have said it. It may not be in the same manner. All those things of trying to demystify knowledge is what has always been driving me. I take things which are complex and try to simplify them so that there is diversity of participation of many other voices. I also take things that people think are very simple and break down those so I demonstrate how complicated they can be. That balance is what often drives me, but the humility though that I could make mistakes along the way, therefore I keep working towards improving. It's what has always made me never to take anything for granted.
Well, Max Neef also talks about the difference between accumulating knowledge and gaining understanding. And it's the whole thing of wisdom and knowledge, and it's about your own experience. And then lastly, Dr. Fikeni, the big hoary issue right now is land and the whole question of whether it can be expropriated without compensation. In my experience with the Yamampondo of the last 15 years that I've been working there, has been for me a bit of like coming back from what I call a sort of an ecological exile of living on the earth into living in the earth. And I've just talked about bringing the land question down to earth, and maybe our westernized view sees land as a two-dimensional cadastral area which they peg out, instead of seeing it at least in three-dimensional, because it's the earth, wind, fire and water combined, and then in the fourth dimension, the spiritual. And I know that President Ramaphosa did say that there's a sense in which until people have a sense of being not owning the land, but being owned by it, to having a sense of their personal humanity being identified with it. And I say this because it's Lent, and as a Catholic they say, in the beginning of Lent, remember man, you are dust, and unto dust you will return. So I want to say, what's your thoughts from a more spiritualist in a sense, rather than a purely kind of economic analysis of this land question?
I do think that any nation, any people are grounded on a certain piece of land. And any alienation from that piece of land is often what has caused wars, has caused discontent. Not only for commercial purpose, but for spiritual sense of belonging. When an African child is born, the umbilical cord, when it falls, is buried either in the kraal or somewhere in a field. It's more like a title deed to say you belong here. Your ancestors will meet you here. Your spiritual connection will be here. Wherever you may go around the world, this is the beginning, and this is probably will be your end. So any alienation from that, even as you think of your history, where you come from, you often come back to the spot to say, we came from this piece of land. Hence, therefore, when we talk of the issue of land, it's spiritual, it's very sensitive, and it has an economic and commercial dimension as well. And the most important thing in the African customs in the main is that the land does not belong to me. It does not belong to the chief who is heading that land. And it belongs to those who once lived there. It belongs to those who live there. And it belongs to those who will be born and live there. So each generation must have that sense of the ecology of intergenerational existence. Even as you nourish and deal with the land, you say, have I taken care of it such that those who will come? Because it belongs to no one and it belongs to everyone. And it's a sense of location. Hence its importance.
Okay, then permit me one last question. So what can settler people like me, pale males who are trying not to be stale in the new South Africa, we have come from a culture which is a very different attitude. The land was simply there for your possession, and it's a very distorted view. I mean, how do we find our identity in the way that Kwame Nkrumah, he said, you might be born in Africa, but until Africa has been born in you, you will not understand it. Now, to some extent, I'm getting there. I don't want to presume to have got there yet, and I know most of my people in my demographic, they'd look at me with a very puzzled expression when I start talking this thing, and they kind of want to start packing for Perth or going back to Europe, because it just seems such a foreign idea. But at the same time, for me, it's been spiritually very enriching to have had that sort of dialogue and encounter and sense of acceptance from the Amapondo. But how can that be generalized for other people of my demographic?
I do think that in the first instance, if you want to belong into a continent or into a country, you must be prepared to go through a very difficult spiritual journey where you start by unlearning some of the things you have learned so that you relearn new things, where you have the courage to be disempowered, to be semi-literate or to be illiterate about certain things in order to learn even from a barefoot village professor. Because you must have this attachment to the place and believe that as much as you may have your great ancestry coming from Europe or coming from elsewhere, that you have now made this home. It should not be tentative. It should not be something which says, if things don't work out here, I'll go elsewhere. It is only then that you do have that acceptance from the others. Because the other challenge that we normally have, it's when people say, I've come because I've knowledge to teach you, without even asking what those people could offer. A meaningful dialogue of civilizations is one other way of immersing yourself into the other culture, when you take it and accept it without any presumptions.